Hi and welcome back to another episode of Herb's Vintage Tech. In this video we will have a look at a series of DSLR cameras from the late 2000s, the Pentax K100D. But before I go on, I would like to shamelessly recommend two of the videos, episode 3 and 4 on my channel, about the Nikon D40. Because what I said about the sensor of the Nikon D40 directly applies to the K100D. They share the same sensor. Yes, you heard that correctly. They use the same 6-megapixel CCD sensor made by Sony. And that's a great thing because the sensor is excellent. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Pentax K100D was produced in 3 different flavors. The original K100D, the K100D Super, and the K110D in that order. All 3 models are the same camera with minor differences that are negligible when you buy them today. I personally own the K100D Super, pictured here on the left, and the K110D on the right. If you pick the cameras up, you will get a sense of the build quality right away. The cameras are very well made and have a nice grip. Here you can see a difference between the K110D and the other 2 models, by the way. The white rim around the LCD panel and the white mode selector wheel. The other 2 models are black. The biggest difference of the K110D is the lack of in-body image stabilization that the other 2 models have. This might seem like a big deal, but it's not. This feature is rather ineffective on the other 2 models. It's a stop at the very best, and you are better off learning proper steady hand-holding techniques. But let me give you 7 reasons why I think the K100D and its siblings are great. Number 1. It runs on AA batteries. When the camera was still sold in stores, it was often seen as a disadvantage as consumers didn't understand that there are many different types of AA batteries. Many people used cheap AA's from the dollar store and thought it was the camera's fault if they only got 15 photos out of them. Today, it makes the camera future-proof. Battery technology is evolving and more powerful AA's are introduced every year. Even these inexpensive Energizer 2000 mAh rechargeables give me 400 shots on my K110D. Much better AA rechargeables are available, and with the best, 700 photos or more are achievable. With this, the battery life of my vintage K100D improves over time, while it gets harder and harder to find good dedicated battery packs for my other vintage digital cameras. Plus, I can use the AA's in other electronics like a flashlight. That's what I call sustainable and flexible. That's how the future should look like, not the past. Next is the size. The camera is pretty compact for a DSLR. It's not quite as small as the competition from the time, the Nikon D40 pictured here on the right. The K100D is a bit bigger in every direction, but really not by that much. But as you can see here, the K100D has a top LCD panel, which the Nikon doesn't have. I will talk about that shortly. The Pentax also has an in-body autofocus motor, also something Nikon left out. If you combine the K100D with prime lenses, you get rewarded with a compact, light and capable camera which fits in really small camera bags. Let's go back to the top LCD panel for a second. The late 2000s was the time camera manufacturers looked for ways to make more profits, leaving out viewfinders on compact cameras, for example. On DSLRs, it was the top-mounted LCD panel that got axed, especially on so-called entry-level models. But Pentax didn't do that. They left it in place on their DSLRs for the longest time. The advantage of this panel is obvious. The most important information is available to the photographer even if you don't look through the viewfinder. This allows you to react to changing situations more quickly. Infos like shutter speed, aperture, battery condition, metering mode, flash condition, ISOs on the Pentax if you press the OK button, and exposure compensation are always in sight. I really love this feature about the K100D. Talking about viewfinders. The one on the K100D is good and displays all the information you need, including ISOs. Yet it is dimmer compared to the Nikon D40. Plus, and this is purely a personal thing, I'm not a big fan of the additional lines in the viewfinder. But I'm a bit of a purist and your experience may be different. No interchangeable lens camera is complete without lenses, and good lenses are the key to good photos, no matter if you shoot a new or a vintage camera. And here Pentax doesn't disappoint. Since 1975, Pentax uses the so-called K-mount on all its SLRs and DSLR cameras. There are many variations of the K-mount lenses, too many to cover them all in this video. Wikipedia has a very good write-up if you want to know more. What's important for us in this video is that there are 3 different types of lenses that are worth looking into if you are using the K100D. If you get one, there is a good chance it came with this 18 to 55mm autofocus kit lens. The autofocus is achieved via a screwdriver motor and powered from within the camera body. That keeps the size of the lens rather compact. Optically, this lens is rather mediocre and it does not unlock the camera's image quality potential. The Nikon D40 kit lens is a lot better, even if other Pentax fans don't want to hear this. There are excellent older autofocus lenses available though that don't break the bank. As you probably gathered by my previous videos by now, I'm a bit stingy and I try to get the best image quality for my hard-earned money. Yet the best bargains are to be had if you are willing to use manual focus lenses. They give you the best image quality for your money. If you watched my video about the Nikon D40 and its special mode and said in the end, nah, that's not for me, that's too complicated, then the Pentax K100D is your solution. Unlike the Nikon, the K100D meters with manual focus lenses. And of those, there are 2 types. First, there are the so-called KA lenses. You can recognize them by the usually green A setting on the aperture ring, like this Exacta 24mm f2.8 prime lens, an excellent bargain of a lens. Here's another example of a KA lens, the Tokina SD 70 to 210mm zoom. It's the ultimate sleeper bargain as you can pick one up for $15. It's a push-pull zoom with macro function and the image quality, especially at 70mm, is outstanding. KA lenses work in any of the automatic modes on the K100D. The only thing you have left to do is focus. The other great bargain are the KM lenses like this Ricoh 50mm f1.7. I picked this lens out of a bric-a-brac bin at a flea market for around $10. There are huge numbers of these lenses to choose from many different manufacturers. This particular Ricoh lens is very compact, almost like a pancake lens when mounted on the K100D, and its fast f1.7 aperture allows great low light shooting. As you can see, these lenses do not have the A on the aperture ring and don't work in any of the auto modes. But you can still meter. It's called stop-down metering. Let me show you how it works. After mounting the lens, you set the selector wheel to manual exposure. Set the desired aperture on the lens itself. The rear dial on the camera now controls the shutter speed. But don't press the shutter button just yet, as you don't know what value to set it to. The camera has to stop down the aperture first and meter. You do that by pressing the AEL button on the rear. Now the camera will display and set the correct shutter speed for the aperture you have chosen. This is a bit like having an external light meter, but already built into the camera. Overall, Pentax has by far the best implementation of manual focus lenses in its DSLRs, and the results of these older lenses can be amazing. Now on to the sensor I briefly talked about in the beginning. If you don't want to watch my video about the Nikon D40, which shares the same 6MP CCD sensor, here's a quick overview over this fantastic chip. Since the sensor's pixels are very big, the pixels contain a lot of information. This directly results in great dynamic range. We can see this in this final result of a landscape shot here. Once we reset the file to its original underexposed raw state, you can see what I mean. Here is another example from this rather dreary day. Once we switch off the edits, we can see how much information we can recover from the raw file. I especially like how well the files react to color input. Pastel colors get rendered especially lovely and natural. and give the images a unique look in my opinion. Greens come out just magical, and next time I go to Ireland, a K100D or Nikon D40 will be my main camera. In this shot we can see how little noise this now almost 20-year-old sensor produces. Throughout its ISO range, noise is very well controlled and the grain looks very much like analog film. I love to shoot this sensor at 800 ISO because of this look. Even when you boost the shadows significantly, like here in this landscape shot, noise gets never out of hand and it's easily controlled in your favorite RAW editor. Speaking about RAW, all the images I show in my videos are shot in RAW if the camera offers it. The K100D's JPEG files out of the camera are very mediocre and don't do the sensor justice. With JPEGs, Nikon and Canon clearly had the upper hand at the time. For my workflow that doesn't matter, yet if you are mainly a JPEG shooter, there are better options out there than the K100D. If you take the effort to develop your own RAWs though, the K100D will reward you with some fantastic results. And if you do it right, nobody can tell if you shot the photo with a modern $3,000 camera or with this vintage camera gem you can get under $100. Let's talk about prices because that's the best thing. I bought my K100D Super on a local classified site for €45/$, kit lens included. The camera had 40,000 actuations on it and works great. My K110D I bought at an auction site for about €60 with kit lens. The camera was basically new with 300 actuations on the shutter. If you buy one, it's very important to ask the seller about corrosion in the battery compartment. If it has corrosion, stay away from it no matter how cheap it is. No camera is perfect and the K100D is no exception. For me, the biggest issue is the very loud shutter. This can be problematic in some situations like museums, churches, during weddings, speeches, and even during some street photography. It's not as loud as a Hasselblad 501, but it has a very distinct, harsh and metallic sound to it that might draw attention to the photographer when it's not desired. The other issue is the lack of a dedicated ISO button. You can't even program a function button like on the Nikon D40. Today this is unimaginable, but back about 20 years ago, Pentax was of the opinion that an auto ISO function would be good enough. Who needs to switch ISOs all the time? This line of thinking is still a remnant of analog film days when your ISOs were locked in with your roll of film. Boy, how the times have changed. So in order to change ISOs on the K100D, you have to press the function button, press the right arrow key, and then you choose the desired ISO sensitivity. And then you press OK. You can get used to it, but it's really not ideal. The ISO issue is not a showstopper. The loud shutter can be, depending on how you use the camera. As for me, I love the K100D. I can work around its quirks and I have a ton of fun with it. It can deliver outstanding images, you can find excellent and inexpensive lenses, and you get one of the best image sensors ever made. I'm serious, even if some people will laugh about me. Stay tuned for more vintage tech and camera videos on Herb's Vintage Tech. Help this channel grow, like and subscribe. Until next time, I wish you always good light.